to go. And as I say, this will be our second to last lecture in this long lecture series on technology. And I think it was appropriate to spend some time on this, given what is happening to our democracy and our society, and trying to understand what's changed and what has, in a sense, put us in a less healthy position in terms of perhaps our individual psychology, our ways of relating to each other, our ways of presenting ourselves to each other, and then even more significantly, I think, for the political point of view, the reliability of the knowledge we use in formulating our opinions about politics, our capacity to communicate with each other, our susceptibility to manipulation, either from our own politicians or from outside forces, or from wildcat political operatives, maybe in the language of Donald Trump, sitting in their basement somewhere. So that's the motivation for this. And I hope as a result of having studied this for quite a while, we're now in a better position to understand a little bit why we are so susceptible to disinformation, manipulation, but also perhaps why some of us are feeling lonelier despite being more connected than at any point in human history, if we're thinking just about the networks that we can place ourselves in. And so today I'm going to finish out the discussion of Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and I want to talk about data colonialism, algorithmic authoritarianism. Sorry, I'm having fun with the language, right? But the idea that our data is treated by big tech companies in the same way that colonial powers treated the rest of the world throughout the 19th and the first half of the 20th centuries, that is to say, simply as places to plunder, right? And so that our data is being plundered without any reservations, without any consent, without any real understanding of what's happening. And that's the metaphor of colonization of our data. Algorithmic authoritarianism, and I'm cautious here, maybe incautious, and then need to reveal to you my lack of caution. The idea that the algorithms, which is to say the software, the computer programs that are used, especially on the social media platforms, but also on Amazon, an online shopping platform, and also by your smart television or your navigation system in your car or any other device that says smart on it, right? That could be your dishwasher or your clothes washer or your refrigerator, or even that little digital photo frame that keeps the nice rotation of images of your family going, right? All of this stuff is governed by algorithms. And if it's smart, if it's connected to the web, if it's part of the Internet of Things, so-called, right? And increasingly more and more of our lives is built this way, right? The way we get our music, the way we turn on our lights, etc., and so on. There's an algorithmic architecture, there's a computer program operating in the background. And a lot of that programming is now interactive. It's not just doing the same thing time and time again. And the way in which it's structured to manipulate our behavior, to modify our behavior, if you prefer gentler language, is something that we get no consent into and are given no awareness of. And so if you believe that efforts to modify human behavior without the consent of those who are being modified, or at least who the effort is to modify their behavior, and without even the awareness, if you believe that is one of the hallmarks of authoritarianism, that's the sense in which there is a kind of new algorithmic authoritarianism at work in so many seemingly innocent devices, applications, social media platforms. And so this then leads to behavioral manipulation and democratic disarray. That's the big underlying concern. So I'll just again remind you that although I'm not relying exclusively on her work, um, one of the most significant and interesting books written on this topic is Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And I'm using her book and her concepts and her framework and her diagram to synthesize this topic. And again, mainly to refresh your memory, I will point out to you that the central concept of Zuboff's work is this concept of surveillance capitalism. And the idea is here simply that one of the most profitable sectors of the economy, the 21st century capitalist economy, is the data extraction sector, the sector in which information about our behavior is collected and then analyzed and then sold. And that this is clearly the business model of Facebook and Google. It is increasingly the business model of Amazon and Microsoft Word, though in different ways. There are relevant differences. But then it seems like everybody else wants in on the action. And so I've mentioned that your smart TV, your smart refrigerator, your smart clothes washer are all doing this now too, as is your automobile. And we'll talk more about this. And obviously, if like me, you're driving a 2000 Dodge, you're safe. But if you're driving an automobile built in the last 5 years that has a navigation system in it, then you're probably not necessarily aware of it. But your car manufacturer is also participating in surveillance capitalism. And so it's not just that there's a whole sector of the economy, one of the most profitable sectors built around this business model. It's also that many other traditional corporations are trying to get into the surveillance capitalism game because it seems to be one of the clear-cut paths to profitability in the middle of the 21st century. And so this leads then to the idea of the extraction imperative. And I'm going to say a little bit more about how data surveillance works than I've said up till this point. And there's a term that was actually invented, as well as a technology that was invented by Netscape, which some of you may remember as an old browser that basically got destroyed by Google, right? And one of the software engineers at Netscape invented the idea of the cookie, right? And so you may have seen that almost anytime you sign on to any kind of web platform these days, you get a privacy notice, and that notice tells you that this site uses cookies to refine its operations, and it asks for you to click a box. And oftentimes, even if you don't click that box, your failure to not opt out represents your consent to have cookies implanted in your computer. What are cookies? Cookies are tiny little programs that inform the company that manufactured them, that put them into your computer, of what you're doing on your computer. So what you're really consenting to when you check that box is to being perpetually surveilled. And it's not just that practically every social media application, practically every website now implants cookies on your computer, including, of course, your handheld computer, right? Which is the better term for what we still somewhat anachronistically call phones, right? The phone portion of that device is a tiny little segment of its overall functionality. So whenever, right, we use any kind of website or application, we are almost automatically, by default, enrolled into a form of surveillance that tracks us in manifold ways. And then in addition to that, Facebook and other companies have reached agreements with many of the website manufacturers and other social media producers to implant additional surveillance software into their applications, their platforms, their websites. And it's not just Facebook, that's just an example. And so the point is that when I say, or somebody else says, you're leaving a data trail wherever you go, it doesn't involve anything you're actively doing. Yes, if you enter your credit card number, your birth date, your driver license number on an online form, there is some chance that it will be intercepted. There's some chance that somebody is collecting that data without your consent. But there's the much more innocent way in which this occurs, which is to say, perhaps unself-consciously, just as an automatic thing to do to get access to a website, you have at some point clicked a authorization, a privacy form, some kind of contract allowing the company that you're using to do, most of us don't know what, but what they're really doing is setting up kind of constant surveillance technological infrastructure. And that is following us everywhere. Another way to think about this, if you had an older phone or an older phone plan, you might have a data allowance on your phone plan, right? And so certain number of gigabits per month you're allowed to use. And if you were to analyze, as many people have, what the primary data use of your phone is, it turns out for almost everyone, it's nothing that we actively do. It's not the phone calls we place. It's not the time we spend reading the newspaper or the mapping application or doing your online banking, etc. Right? I'm not sure what else you do with your phone, but we do diverse things with our handheld computers. But it turns out for almost everyone, the single largest use of data, the use that dwarfs most others, is your phone reporting out using all of these cookies or surveillance programs that have been placed into it. Again, if you use application-based coupons, right? And so a lot of grocery stores now say, download our app and then scan the code when you're shopping and we'll give you an extra coupon. Well, they're surveilling you right there, and they're watching how much time you spend on which item in which aisle at which part of the store, right? Shopping experience by shopping experience, so that they can better steer you, predict your shopping patterns, market to you, right? And if you use an online some kind of map application, right? Ways to avoid traffic, or Google Maps just to know where you're going. Again, you are being tracked everywhere you go. That data is being sent from your phone to servers. Those servers are creating a profile of your traffic, travel, geographic patterns that are then used again to try to manipulate your behavior. And so the dispossession cycle, and as always, because there was a little background noise, I muted everyone. Whenever you have a question or a comment, please feel free to share it. No need to wait, okay? So I can't see you, just unmute or put it in the chat box, whatever is easier for you. The dispossession cycle refers to the fact that, in essence, we all need to use this technology, right? I'll give you a simple example. You remember phone books, right? We used to get one or two new phone books, yellow pages and white pages, every year. When's the last time you got a phone book? Right, and the point is that phone books have become almost obsolete. Almost everyone has Google. Almost every business is listed online, and so rather than right wasting all that paper, right, and in a sense, environmentally, it's not a bad thing. We have basically all but eliminated the phone book. You can still get them, but they're not readily distributed automatically the way they used to be. And this refers then to the fact that, in a sense, our social world is built around the assumption that we're using this technology, and in a sense, we have to use this technology to navigate our social world. But having said that, when we use that technology, we are implicitly making a bargain where we get that technology more or less for free. You still got to pay for your internet access, but you're not paying to use Google, right? You are giving up, surrendering your control over your own personal data. And when I say personal data, I should be clear, right? Your location, your reading habits, your shopping habits, where you like to travel on Sunday afternoons, whether that is in car or on foot, etc. This then goes into the manufacturing of what Zuboff calls prediction products. And these are, to be clear, using complex artificial intelligence and behavioral science on a scale that really, I think 20 years ago would have been completely unimaginable, right? If you get the data on millions, hundreds of millions of people, and you subject what their behavioral patterns are to artificial intelligence analysis that can do computations, see patterns in ways that no human being can. The brain is so much bigger than our brain, right? That things that we might miss show up on artificial intelligence when it's used to analyze our behavior. And then you give somebody a nudge. You show them an advertisement at this time of the day for this product, discounted this much, and you see what happens, right? And if the person buys it, maybe the next time around, you give them a slightly lower discount and you see if they buy it, right? And you repeat that experiment 100 million times a week, right? You get better and better at predicting how people will react based on the very specific profile of their behavior you've accumulated, and the ability to compare that behavior with the behavior of hundreds of millions or billions of other people, and to see in real time how different kinds of efforts at modifying their behavior play out, right? And so the result is that these products get more and more refined, more and more sophisticated, more and more efficacious. And so if you're running a business today and you're trying, as almost every business is trying to do, to reach consumers, to get them to purchase your product or your service or to visit your showroom, et cetera, and so on, you're almost bound to purchase some of these products, to play the game of digital marketing. And when you're playing that game, you are, in essence, by necessity, working with prediction products. And so this gives rise to what Zuboff refers to as a new kind of power, right? And when she refers to it as a new kind of power, she's referring, I think, to several aspects of it. One of them is that for the time being, it's not mainly in this country used by our government. Of course, in China and other authoritarian societies, it is used by the government, right? And you may know that China has implemented a social credit score. And we're going to get into this a little bit more further into the lecture. But the idea is that you're tracked and surveilled everywhere. China has also started to eliminate physical, tangible currency, right, to replace it exclusively with digital currency. And one major attraction for the Chinese government of digital currency is it means every transaction that any person in their society does will be monitored, will be surveilled, will be susceptible to data collection and analysis. And so the social credit score refers to your overall behavior. How law-abiding are you? How patriotic are you? How good a Chinese citizen are you, based on the way in which the government calculates that? And then, will you get a promotion at work? What kind of job will you get into? What kind of university or college will you get into? Where will you be allowed to live? And all of that, right, is increasingly dependent upon your social credit score. And so it gives the government a very effective way to influence the behavior of its citizens. Now, if you're saying to yourself, thank God I don't live in China, that sounds awful. Part of what Zuboff is pointing out with her conception of instrumentarian power is that, in fact, increasingly, the big tech industries and the products they develop have something like the power that the Chinese government has over its citizens, over us, right? And so it's not governmental power. It's not yet governmental power, and we've got to hope that it remains not governmental power. But that doesn't mean that it's not power, right? And it doesn't mean that it doesn't in many ways operate in forms that are parallel to what the Chinese government is doing. And in a sense, when Zuboff titles one of her chapters Big Other instead of Big Brother, she's posing the question, how much does it matter whether it's Google and Facebook and Microsoft that exercises this kind of power over us, or the government that exercises this kind of power over us? And immediately, I think we say, well, last time I checked, Google does not operate a prison system, right? Or a court system, or have police. And so, yes, there are relevant differences. But on the other hand, if the concern is not only with the exercise of explicit coercive power, but also with manipulation, then I think Zuboff is right to suggest we should be deeply concerned about this, even if it's not as bad as explicit state authoritarianism. Now, I just added in passing, maybe I need to be a little bit more explicit, that part of what's going on here is that we have not regulated this at all. And so another advantage of the fact that this is not state authoritarianism, but private sector pseudo-authoritarianism, if you will, might be that we could actually use our state to regulate technology. And you may have noticed there were hearings about this in Congress this week, the week that just passed, right? And so we may be on our way to regulating some of this. The hearings are more narrowly focused right now on disinformation. I'll say a little bit more about that as we get a little deeper into this. But the hope behind Zuboff and the people who are analyzing this is that by calling attention to it, they may spur us to do a little bit more to protect our privacy, to protect our data, to protect ourselves from manipulation. And then one of the big questions is, why haven't we already taken on that task? And here I think a little bit of a historical perspective is helpful, right? And so the first thing to notice is on Zuboff's account, and I think she's right, and I should point out, Tim Wu, who I've referred you to and who I like very much, reviewed Zuboff's book maybe a year ago in the New York Review of Books, and he did criticize, and I think fairly, her treatment of Google. And sorry, he suggested that Zuboff probably tells a story in which Google is the villain and sinister in ways that probably exaggerate their intentionality, the intentionality of the company, the founders, and the people working for it. He points out, Tim Wu points out, that it's better to view Google as kind of having done a Faustian bargain, which is to say they really wanted to follow their slogan, do no evil or don't be evil, is the motto of Google. They, on the other hand, also wanted to make profit. And at some point they realized, and they had a lot of venture capitalists, I think they had $50 million in venture capital when they started up, that to satisfy their investors, but also to realize their potential for profitability, and their founders and initial workers and owners and investors became just obscenely rich on the basis of this business model, that they had to actually sell their surplus data, right? That was the resource they had that generated almost limitless value and profit for them. And so as they went from being a privately held to a publicly traded company, as they issued their initial public offerings, they decided that this was the path that they would go down. And in so doing, Google basically invented surveillance capitalism. And it's not clear that they fully anticipated the consequences in terms of opening up an entire new era in the history of capitalism, an entirely new mode of accumulating profit, or how lucrative it was going to be. But I think the better way to view them, as opposed to having a sinister scheme to invade our privacy from the outset, is having kind of accidentally happened onto this model and then followed it where it took them, and perhaps even being surprised at how profitable and how systemic its effects were. So that's the discovery of surplus data as a profitable asset at exactly the right moment in terms of Google's need to pay back its investors and to begin becoming a profitable company. And so that's, in a sense, why Google set down this path. Now, one clear advantage Google had is that they were operating in uncharted territory. And again and again, Zuboff points out that Google, when it tries to account for how it makes profit, discloses as little as possible of its actual operating model. And it claims that the technology that it uses, the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, the data that it collects are all proprietary and therefore should not be publicly disclosed, or else they would surrender their market advantage. And the result has been that they have remained opaque to both the public and to regulators for most of their history. And for much of that history, we frankly couldn't open up the hood and examined the engine, but we didn't even really know what kind of engine it was, right? What exactly is going on here? And so one advantage Google has had in forestalling regulation and in a sense protecting this entire sector of the economy from governmental regulation is that it was brand new. And it is almost always the case that the democratic effort to regulate capitalism is belated. That we see where the market goes. The old phrase from von Hayek that capitalism is creative destruction, that it constantly revolutionizes itself and finds new ways of making profit, means that we're almost always figuring out after the innovation has occurred what the human or social or environmental consequences are of new ways of making profit, right? And so this is not unique or unusual, but nevertheless, the fact that Google was operating in uncharted territory means that there was less will or capacity to regulate it. There's an additional couple of factors here that speak to why Google didn't get regulated and still really hasn't been effectively regulated. And I'm using Google to stand in for the entire sphere of surveillance capitalism. One of them is that Google, the company, came of age in the early 2000s, right? That's when we first started discovering what a powerful search engine and browser they had developed, and first started using the term Google as if it were a generic verb as opposed to a specific company's product. And this is in an era, right? George W. Bush is president for the first 8 years that Google is really making a lot of progress. And more generally, Congress is quite skeptical about regulation. Ronald Reagan has declared a couple decades earlier that government is the problem, not the solution. And this is a free market or neoliberal philosophy, which suggests get out of the way of the market and the market will make lots of profit, and that profit will eventually enrich everyone, that there will be tremendous innovation, etc. Right? And so don't regulate the market, let it do its magic of its own accord. And so this was then an era of skepticism about regulation in general, and so Google was able to come of age without much regulatory scrutiny. Final and more specific factor here is that, of course, the early 2000s are also the height of the war on terror. And our government, the national security apparatus within our government, is very interested in using new technology to try to get as much information as it can about potential terrorists and forestall any new large terrorist attacks. And Google mainly cooperates with that effort. And the result is that the government is, in a sense, letting Google do some of its work for it. It would be harder for the National Security Agency to collect all this data than it is for Google to collect it. If Google shares it with the NSA and other agencies within the federal government national security apparatus, then why not just let them keep going with this model, given that we're all benefiting from it? So there's a little bit of why it is that up until this point, we haven't tried to regulate it. I think I've got my diagrams now from Zuboff's book, which I've already, I think, shared and explained with you. And so I'm not going to continue with them. This third one is one that we've not looked at together yet, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But I will point out the basic idea, and I don't really much like this diagram, but the basic idea is that as this industry has grown more and more sophisticated and just enormous in terms of the scale of its operations. The more the extraction imperative has driven further and further from the online world into the physical world. And so that's your mapping technology built into your phone and your car, following where you go into your daily life. That's your smart speaker or your smart television collecting data about you, into your body and yourself. If you use a Fitbit, or if you enter your health data into a health program, right, you are divulging more and more information about yourself. And that, in a sense, this is the natural trajectory of this business model, is to continuously find new ways of getting data about us, of making products that we think that are fun and cool and convenient, that at the same time that they help you to determine how many steps you took a day or how well you slept at night, collect oodles of data about you. And it's worthwhile noting, of course, that Google recently bought Fitbit in order to have yet another data stream, right? And so, right, and the metaphor that Zuboff is using here is, this is some kind of avalanche getting bigger and bigger and heading right into the heart of our communities. But what I want to talk more about is the new frontiers of this model. And so I've already talked about the Internet of Things and ubiquitous computing, in a sense, right? That is the fact that your car and your smart television are now connected. But I want to point out to you that it is increasingly the case that people are building computational technology into more and more intimate aspects of their selves. And so the idea that our clothes will almost certainly, and by the way, you can already buy some, but it's a pretty niche market right now, pretty soon have integrated computing in them, or that we may actually insert chips into our bodies, right? And so there are people who've done this already and think it's pretty cool that they can just put their finger on their car and their car opens and starts, because the chip that would have been in the key, instead of being in the key, is in their flesh. Or that we can use our glasses to be doing constant computing, right? And so, again, on the one hand, there's a kind of computer geek aspect to this. How much computing can we have? Can we have it all the time? Wouldn't that be great? But it's also driven by a business model that suggests the more opportunities there are to collect more fine-grained information about everyone, the better the prediction products are going to be, the more rigorous and complete the data set is going to be, the better and the more valuable the prediction products are going to be. Now, I want to talk about something else that Zuboff talks about, and that I think is a really important and, in certain respects, quite frightening aspect of this new technology. And this is what's sometimes called affective or emotional computing. And this is the aim on the part of the people building social media applications, online platforms, other kinds of technology, to both elicit and detect emotional responses to their technology. And in a sense, we've already talked a little bit about this in terms of the dopamine rush that you sometimes are induced to get from the applications running on your smartphone. And this leads young people to maybe get up in the middle of the night to look at their Facebook news feed to see how many likes or comments they got on the posts they posted right before they went to sleep. But this is, I think, increasingly deliberate and sophisticated. The idea that as opposed to just giving somebody a better deal to enlist them to do what you want them to do by the product, if you can give them a sense that they will be cool or connected, or that their anxiety will be abated, etc., and so on. Their loneliness will vanish upon purchasing this or that product, and that perhaps it's in the interest of the marketer to enhance the negative emotion that they're trying to get you to believe you can remedy through consumption, right? That this is going to be much more sophisticated. Those of you who've read Betty Friedan or other critical accounts of 50s marketing know that this is not new, right? That trying to convince a lonely housewife that buying the right cleaning product is the key to making her feel more satisfied with her existence. Know that, right, playing on our emotions is a old, tried and tested marketing technique. But the degree of sophistication that this new technology allows, the capacity of your phone or your computer to read your facial expression in real time, to read your emotional state out of things that you are probably unaware that your eyes or the corner of your mouth or the frown lines in your forehead are doing, right? That in a sense betray what your emotional response is, to then analyze that data and perfect the effort to trigger that emotional response, to predict on the basis of what that emotional response will do, is, I think, extremely frightening in terms of the increasing sophistication of the tools of emotional manipulation. And so this is a new frontier. It's still developing, but again, we may not have the excuse that we had 20 years ago, that this is uncharted territory. We don't know where it's going. How were we supposed to anticipate that this is what would happen? I think in 2021, we might be a little bit more wary of these developments now that we can see them starting, and say it's time for us to ask our government, our representatives, our regulators to hit the brakes on these kinds of developments. Outsourcing of decision-making to informationally empowered algorithms. And I've mentioned algorithms at the outset and in previous lectures. And this is, right, what I've called the architecture of these programs, of the applications and platforms that we all use. And the point is that this is not a person making the decisions about what you're going to see on your Facebook news feed, or what the outcome is going to be of your Google search, or what kind of advertisements you're going to be targeted with as a result of what you're searching for. This is algorithms, right? This is a combination of sophisticated computer programs and of very powerful artificial intelligence running those programs to detect information, patterns, make predictions that involve billions of data points being analyzed on a daily basis. And so part of the point here is that no human being could do this. And if you hired a team of human beings to do it, it would be exorbitantly expensive and prohibitively difficult to coordinate, right? And so in a sense, we have to transfer most of these operations into computer programs, the behavior of which, maybe that's the right term, I'm searching for an alternative, but in a sense, these computer programs do have behavior, in the sense that it's often difficult to predict where they're going to go. One of the things I'll talk with you about a little bit next week, let me see if I can just show you the books, have to do with the way in which many of these algorithms, this is the book, The Algorithms of Oppression by Saifa Emoja-Noble, and this is the book, I'm sorry, Automating Inequality, right, by Virginia Eubanks, and they're both on the way in which it seems completely unanticipated by the engineers, the computer software engineers who build these algorithms. The algorithms are becoming racist or classist, or doing things that reinforce and deepen some of the main fissures of inequality in our society, right? And so nobody intended the algorithm, Google search engine, for instance, when you search for Black girls, for instance, which is something that Sophia Umoja-Noble did when her nieces were coming over and she wanted to find activities for them, that a bunch of porn sites would pop up, and a bunch of white supremacist hate sites would pop up, right? But it appears the algorithm is designed to take you where people who put that search term in tend to go, and if that's where they tend to go, then that's what you get, right? And so part of I think what is again challenging us in terms of our capacity to regulate these algorithms is that they operate in ways that we don't readily understand or predict. They are proprietary, right? That they are the kind of heart and soul of the profit machine of so many of these companies. And so they're certainly reluctant at best to share their programming with us so that we can actually figure out how it works and see what we might want to change. But this is what seems to be increasingly driving the use of our data, is not human decisions, but automated decision-making by very sophisticated, poorly understood computer programs. And then the fourth and final aspect of this is the idea of the behavioral manipulation, and in particular, the idea that as opposed to just trying to get you to comply the way kind of the blunt power of coercion does, it's much more likely to push, nudge, and steer you. And so I think we talked a little bit earlier about the way in which when you're writing an email on Gmail, it now tries to suggest to you how to complete your sentence or your thought. I think it was Flossie who called our attention to that, right? And I mentioned how when I want to play some music because I've got friends over and I'm not interested in spending a lot of time thinking about what kind of music I want to put on them, I can ask my phone to play a playlist for me, and it chooses music from my songs, right? Or I start to type something into my navigation software, and it makes a suggestion about where it thinks I want to go, right? And this is going to become increasingly ubiquitous, right? That we get a little bit of a push, a nudge, a steer from our technology, and that it in a sense feels like, yes, how did you know I wanted to go there, right? And in a sense we should be scared about that, but it's also the case that we should also be a little skeptical. Did I really want to go there? Or is it just the case that that was one of the places I might have wanted to go, and out of the list of places I wanted to go, my technology is pre-selecting for me one of them. So I'm now going to spend a little bit of time being a bit more philosophical and eventually a bit more political about all this, and suggest to you that some central concepts are being transformed for us by this technology. And I just looked at the time. I realize I'm running short. I'll be quick about the first idea, the idea of privacy, and then I'll open this up for some questions. So, starting with the idea of privacy, and I want to talk about two different meanings to privacy, and then a historical association in the way in which that's being perhaps broken down. So the first meaning of privacy is the idea of a space that is sheltered so that intimate relations and affairs can take place, right? And so classically, the bedroom would be the most intimate private sphere, but also the home, right? And you might also think about the letter and the way in which you might put thoughts into a letter that you then sealed in an envelope on the assumption that no one but the addressee of the letter would see that letter, right? That this would allow you to say things that you might not say in contexts that didn't have privacy, to engage in kinds of conduct that you wouldn't engage in if you were not in the sheltered sphere of intimate privacy. And then there's a second meaning to privacy that I think is very important to the law in particular, which is that this is a sphere of the private sphere in which you get to make decisions about how you are going to lead and order your life, right? And so the state doesn't have any power to tell you how you're going to make your end of life decisions. People maintain as one way of thinking about the robust conception of privacy that recent constitutional law seems to be protecting, right? And so it's not just that this is a sphere in which you get to speak your innermost secrets. It's also a sphere in which you get to exercise self-control without interference. Now, the additional feature that I think is extremely important is that for a long time, we've associated privacy with a capitalist market economy. And I'll just point out to you that historically, the idea that everybody would have a bedroom to themselves is relatively recent, right? It's only about 250, 300 years ago that architecture started moving in that direction. The idea that everybody would have private housing, period, right? As opposed to the tenements in which multiple families lived together and rotated through the beds according to their work schedules. This depends on the wealth that a private capitalist market economy tends to generate and the resources that it then gives everyone to construct their own sphere of privacy. So there's been this strong association, and you can think of Milton Friedman, I think in particular, as someone who said, right, the reason to value capitalism is not only for its productivity, but because of the way in which its productivity enables a kind of free life that we all value. That this association of privacy with the capitalist market economy has been taken for granted by libertarian thinkers for a very long time. And that it may always have been a little suspect, a little class specific, a little problematic, but in the age of surveillance capitalism, it seems increasingly inapplicable, right? Difficult to maintain this thesis. And as opposed to that, it appears that perhaps for the last 250 years, there was a contingent alignment between capitalism and privacy, but capitalism is now moving in a direction in which, in order to generate profit, it has to violate or reconfigure privacy. And again, that should be a reason for us to be thinking through what kind of regulations we need at this moment in our history. All right, I just spoke for a very long time. Let me stop and open it up for questions, to comments, thoughts, disagreements, etc. Who wants to start us out? I will go ahead and unmute everyone. Marion, I see your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay. I'm wondering about an ignorance that seems not to be corrected. When I get mail requesting donations from a variety of worthy organizations, they don't seem to know. They send me the same requests over and over again, even though they should know by now that I tend to give at the beginning of the year, and I give once a year, and all the mail that they're sending me the rest of the time is a total waste of their efforts. Why don't they know, and why don't they pay attention?
I would suggest to you that in a sense we should be relieved that they don't know and they're not paying attention, despite all the junk mail that you're getting and the need to wade through it and the waste of paper. And what I will point out to you, and I actually know about this primarily from the Barack Obama 2012 campaign, that they agreed to work with some behavioral scientists to do some experiments during their campaign. And one of the experiments was, when do you reach the threshold of annoyance such that people stop giving because they're tired of being pestered by you? And so they started out soliciting contributions once a month. And then they upped it to once a week. And then they upped it to once a day. And then they upped it to twice a day. And what they were looking for was, where does that threshold lie, right? At what point are people going to say, enough, I'm never giving to you again? And you know what they found? They couldn't get to that threshold. That every time they increased the frequency of the advertisement, their donations went up.
Oh my God.
So that I suspect is what's going on here, Marion, which is that you are atypical, right? And that most of us, when we give more frequent solicitations, actually give more frequently. And when I say we should be thankful that they haven't got so individualized that they figured out, let's not send the email to Marion except in January, because that means that their level of sophistication has become completely personalized. And that means their potential power is that much greater. Make sense?
I guess so.
David?
And I'm seeing Flossie has her hand up. Go ahead, Flossie.
Okay. I had the first draft of my will in my computer. And what has happened is that an organization that I value is writing to me to tell me how delighted they are that I'm remembering them in my will. It is supposed to be private, and they are reading my will, the first draft, on the internet. That's scary. I'm thinking that I won't, I'm afraid to talk to them. They're willing to come and talk to me. They want to meet me. I'm not kidding.
So
this is the beginning of Big Brother.
Yeah, that's pretty awful. And I, among other things, I would suggest that you might want to take your computer to some kind of security expert and see if you have some kind of corruption in your computer, because that shouldn't happen. As bad as all of this stuff is, I'm assuming you didn't post it on the web, right?
No,
you did it as a Word document or something like that. That should not escape from your computer, to the best of my knowledge, unless your computer has been compromised. And then the second question, and the organization in question, you might want to call them.
Yes.
And say, I support your work and I do want to put you in my will, but how the hell did you figure out that I want to put you in my will, right? You know, and maybe not even be that accusatory, but just ask them where they're getting the information from, right?
I'm almost afraid to do it, but I will.
Yeah, if it's a reputable charitable organization, I don't see any reason that you're
Yes,
going to further compromise yourself by asking that question.
thank you, David.
Of course, of course. Anybody else in with the horror story or anything from today's lecture you want to ask about? I see Matt has his hand up. Go ahead.
I've been sufficiently paranoid about this problem for a number of years to maintain two separate computers. And one is connected to the internet, the other one's not. It's very helpful at times when I want to do research on the internet on one screen and then write on the other. That's the basic reason why I set this up. But also find that it's very helpful to keep certain kinds of information on the one that's not internet connected. The only remaining concern I have is that when I sometimes move stuff with a flash drive from one computer to the other, has somebody managed to corrupt that so that it's also carrying stuff that I didn't want to reveal from my secure computer to the other one? But I don't think so. I think that one's reasonably secure.
Yeah, and I know when I look at Matt when I'm giving these lectures, I sometimes wonder whether he should be giving these lectures. He's probably more technologically savvy than I am. The thing I want to point out, and I'll just be very simple and direct about this, is that there are, in a sense, two different kinds of concerns here. One of them is that the web is full of bad actors, right? And you should be very alert to the possibility of what's called phishing with a PH instead of an F, right? Which is somebody sends you a link. It seems to be, an emergency, or there's something that's gone wrong on one of your credit cards, or it's some kind of promotion, or you've won some kind of prize, and just follow this link and you'll get money, or we'll help you to address your security problem. Never follow those links, right? That's the way they get their what's called malware into your computer or into your phone. And as Matt points out, once it's in one, it can move between them pretty readily. That's really not what we're talking about in this lecture series. We're talking about Google, right? One of the largest, best respected companies in the world today. They're not, North Korean or Russian hackers trying to steal your information. They are using what are considered to be perfectly legal and legitimate techniques to create this very detailed data profile of you in order to be able to manipulate you. I have somebody coming over, and I don't know if you just heard the doorbell ring in the background, but I think I'm going to have to go get the door. It's been wonderful, as always, spending time with you today. It seemed to go particularly fast today. I enjoy it, as always. You guys take care. And like I say, we will finish out this lecture series, and then we will move on to new stuff beginning in April. Talk to everybody soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
You will.